This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to do a Toxic Bitcoin Friday. Basically, your Bitcoin questions answered, your shitcoin aspirations cruelly mocked in front of everyone. In other words, a good time will be had by all, at least by Toxic Bitcoin maxis. We begin with a comment from Derek Pacha, 1214. My wife has her entire retirement invested in Bitcoin through Fidelity. Oh wait, Fidelity doesn't interest in Bitcoin, so she must be an S&P 500, but the chart of S&P 500 looks exactly the same as Bitcoin. Can anyone explain why I would go through learning about Bitcoin, self-custody, paying large fees, when I could just give my money to Fidelity and not worry about anything? So far, there's a perfect correlation to stock market. In fact, you don't even need to check the price of Bitcoin. Could it perhaps be that the Bitcoin price is as corrupted and manipulated like the rest of this country? Oh, surely not. I answer the question by saying I can give you a few reasons why you might want to own Bitcoin over the S&P 500 or an ETF or mutual fund that tracks it. Bitcoin is up over 1,000% over the past 5 years, while the S&P 500 is up a mere 90%. So perhaps you and your wife are allergic to high returns. Your wife's Fidelity account can be frozen at any time if the government or company decides that they don't like you or that you're a bad person, something similar that happened with the Canadian truckers. You can't do anything when Fidelity and the stock exchanges pause trading like they did after 9/11. Your S&P 500 ETF is basically frozen in there. When your wife wants to move her money out of Fidelity, she has to ask permission from the company, and even then it will take days or probably weeks to move the money. Whereas I can store my Bitcoin in my head using just 12 words, and I can go anywhere in the world and take it with me easily. My Bitcoin cannot be frozen by anyone, unlike things that sit in a brokerage account. You cannot buy or sell the S&P 500 or an ETF over the weekend or at night, while I can enter or exit Bitcoin 24/7, 365. Finally, there are only 21 million Bitcoin, while there are potentially infinite shares of stock. What do you prefer to invest in personally, or are you just living off of your wife, which seems likely? And then Derek Pacha, another comment. Can you please possibly elaborate why such precious and independent asset like Bitcoin is so dependent and in tandem with such corrupted and manipulated horse crap like the U.S. stock markets? Why, on the other hand, gold that you so much disregard is beautifully moving in opposite direction? This is so frustrating. Please help me understand. Thank you. Well, this is gold moving up against Bitcoin. We can see such a massive move, and gold bugs are very, very happy about this because they're finally winning for once. But this is basically when this chart moves up, that's gold appreciating against Bitcoin. So nothing to be that excited about. And when we take a look at how Bitcoin and gold have performed, basically gold is in the process of going to zero against Bitcoin. Whereas the S&P 500, this is a chart of Bitcoin versus the S&P 500. When this moves up, it means Bitcoin's appreciating versus the S&P 500. And while you do have daily and sometimes weekly correlations between Bitcoin and risk assets like stocks or stock indices like the S&P 500, you can see here that over multi-year periods, Bitcoin has been appreciating much faster than the S&P 500, which is why we had that 1,000% return from the S&P from Bitcoin and only a 90% return from the S&P 500. So Bitcoin is a very, very different kind of asset. It's a bearer asset. You can hold it in self-custody, unlike stocks, and it also has much more scarcity than stocks. It's a digital commodity. It's globally distributed. It doesn't sit in a brokerage account. So it's quite different. Question from China Chimal. ETH's purpose is smart contracts and is not a competitor to Bitcoin. No use to compare those two. And my response, remember when everyone used to say that ETH is ultrasound money? That sounded like a competition, and talked about how he was going to flip Bitcoin. Sounds like competition to me. Now that ETH has lost the game, the narrative is changing. And ETH has gone through many different narratives, from world computer to smart contract platform to the nether part of the body from which all shitcoins explode, which is basically what ETH has been. Anthony Travis, 1420, saying, Matt secretly owns Monero XMR. My response, I definitely do not own any Monero. I'm not stupid like you. Next comment is from 32 Jonathan Magtibay 64. Government is working directly with Bitcoin, but not with Monero. It's a hint. Crypto was not supposed to work with government. My response, another hint for you. Bitcoin is money for everyone, including your enemies. And it may be that the reason that the U.S. government and other governments are not paying any attention to Monero is because it has a market cap of 5 billion and is basically doesn't matter anymore. Comment from Adrian Gurley. BSV, which is a failed fork of Bitcoin. BSV is taking over the world. Bitcoin is a Ponzi scam forked version of Bitcoin. When you take a look at the chart of BSV versus Bitcoin, as this moves down, that means BSV is losing value against Bitcoin. And this commenter says that BSV is taking over the world. It doesn't really look like it when you take a look at this chart. It basically looks like BSV is going to zero against Bitcoin. Of course, BSV was the coin that the scammer Craig Wright, who claimed to be Satoshi but clearly wasn't and was declared by the UK court system not to be Satoshi, this was his favorite coin. So if you keep bad company like him, you're bound to end up losing a lot of money holding BSV instead of holding BTC. Next up, a comment from Mark EZ2VW. In your portfolio, you need both Litecoin and Bitcoin as money and investment. You can't print Litecoin. Litecoin is not a security. Blah, 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 blah. My response, sadly, no one cares. The world only needs one proof of work coin, and Bitcoin has already won. We can see Litecoin crashing to zero against Bitcoin in this chart. As we scroll out, it looks like every other shitcoin going to zero against Bitcoin. So who cares what Litecoin's properties are? It is already lost. And when we look a little bit more deeply into its properties, it only has a market cap of 5 billion versus Bitcoin's 1.58 trillion, but it's also 11 times slower when it comes to final settlement. So there's no reason you'd want to use an inferior proof of work coin like this that's 11 times slower than BTC. Bitcoin Cash, which is another failed fork of Bitcoin, is 259 times slower. And Dogecoin, I have no idea why you'd want to store your savings in Dogecoin, but it's 7 times slower. So actually, Dogecoin is faster in terms of final settlement than Litecoin. And then something like Monero is 212 times slower than Bitcoin. So those are the fundamentals of those currencies. Dave Match 5318 heard it, meaning Bitcoin, heard Bitcoin can be government controlled, not meant for everyday transactions, costs $3 per transaction, and takes up to 10 minutes for transaction verification. My response, no government can control Bitcoin. If they could, they would have already shut it down years ago. Bitcoin is definitely meant for everyday transactions, and I use it that way. Transaction fees move around and are set by the free market. Right now, you can send $1 billion worth of Bitcoin for 34 cents. That seems like a very low transaction fee. Block times are 10 minutes on average, but you usually should wait 3 to 6 blocks for high-value transactions so they don't get rewritten and cannot be reversed. For faster transactions, you can still use Bitcoin. You just want to use it on the Lightning Network, which is even cheaper and is faster than the base layer, but doesn't have the same final settlement guarantees. We can see even right now, you can send a typical Bitcoin transaction for just 34 cents. And this doesn't depend on the monetary value you're sending. So you could send $100 worth of Bitcoin for 34 cents or $100 million or $1 billion for the same transaction fee. Transaction fees just vary based on the amount of data that they take up in the block. Liev Garcia, maybe stupid question. Could ETH decide to move back to proof of work, or alternatively ETH Classic gain traction? My response, they could. ETH could decide to move back to proof of work. It just really depends on what Vitalik wants to do with that coin. They could, but changing big things like this is part of the problem with ETH. The base layer of money should be predictable and constant, like Bitcoin is, so that users can make long-term economic decisions using it. If you change your consensus mechanism every few years, no one can plan. And this is one of the reasons that ETH continues to lose value against Bitcoin. In terms of ETH Classic, this is back from the DAO hack, and it is basically was abandoned when Vitalik chose the other side of the fork. And then stablecoin issuers, no one is on ETC. The rest of the ecosystem is not on this either. So ETH Classic has done, I believe, even worse than ETH. But you don't want to touch either of these. They're basically failed or failing coins. And then Moore's Sum Lover. What about the technology of altcoins, cryptocurrencies? I know you do not see the monetary value of anything except Bitcoin, but what about decentralized storage, decentralized computing, decentralized websites? These have all been tried over the years using altcoins and have all proven to be failures, and all the tokens have trended to zero against Bitcoin. He goes on to write, decentralized websites would require decentralized storage and computing. Your videos are like that one potato chip that you say you're going to have. What are your thoughts on crypto URLs to receive payments? My response, I'm fine with decentralized tech, but you don't need a new coin or token for it. And this is one reason people come up with endless variations, have come up with endless variations on Bitcoin, because they want to pre-mine, they want to have an insider allocation for themselves. And then what ends up happening, I believe Filecoin was an example of decentralized storage. These things never work. There are very interesting protocols like Nostr that don't come with their own coin or token. And in fact, you can zap people's sats or Bitcoin using Nostr, And I will put a link to my video about Nostr in the description notes below. So it's fine to have tech, it's fine to have decentralized tech, but if someone's trying to introduce a new token for their technology, it's almost certainly going to fail. I'm fine with decentralized tech, but you don't need a new coin or token for it. Everything you mentioned can be made using Bitcoin as the payment. Money is a winner-take-all game, and Bitcoin has already won. It's very important to recognize this, that Bitcoin has already won, and it's now being priced in as its closest competitors like ETH continue to plummet and get destroyed by Bitcoin. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video, and let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.